Hello, my name's Hannah Minty. I'm a partner in the family team here at Russell-Cooke, and I want to welcome you to this short video, which is part of a series for our Dispute Resolution Hub, looking at the ways in which you can resolve disputes outside court proceedings. Today, I wanted to take a few minutes to talk to you about something which you might hear if you're in divorce proceedings and you're trying to sort out the finances, which is the private FDR hearing. It might sound like legal jargon, so I wanted to explain a little bit about what it is and how it might help you. FDR stands for Financial Dispute Resolution, and it's a court hearing which occurs as one of the stages of financial proceedings where a couple is divorcing or dissolving a civil partnership and a separate application has been made to the court for assistance in reaching a financial settlement. Essentially, an FDR is an opportunity for people to set out their positions to a neutral third party in court proceedings. This is likely to be a judge who's appointed to hear the case on the day, and that judge will then give their view on how the case would be likely to be decided should it go on to a final hearing. It provides both of you with a reality check on the merits of your case and the likely outcome if the settlement is not agreed at the FDR hearing. And it's a chance for everybody to come together for discussions and negotiations to see if an agreement can be reached. An FDR is a without prejudice hearing, which means that any proposal that you make during the course of the FDR cannot be repeated at a later date in open court. And this gives you the freedom to negotiate without worrying that you might compromise your long-term position if a settlement isn't reached. The FDR hearing aims to encourage a settlement between the two of you and avoid the time and expense of a final hearing. It's effectively an early neutral evaluation of your case, and it can be a really useful opportunity for everybody to take stock and focus on the merits and the risks of proceeding and to look at the cost implications of going any further. And a significant portion of cases settle either at the FDR hearing or shortly after it. So there are two different types of FDR, a court FDR and a private FDR. And the main difference is the location that the FDR takes place in and the identity of the person who is acting as the judge. For a court FDR, the process takes place inside a courtroom in front of a court-appointed judge who you will have no choice over and who might know nothing about the case until they receive the papers, sometimes only a matter of hours, if not less, before the hearing starts. For a private FDR, it takes place outside of the court venue, somewhere where you choose, which is often your solicitor's office or the barrister's meeting room, and it will take place in front of a neutral third party who's acting as a judge, and you will have agreed the identity of this person in advance and you will be paying for their time. So who can be a private FDR judge? Well, usually it's an experienced barrister or solicitor. Sometimes it can be a retired or part-time judge, but your solicitor will be able to suggest some possible names for people who could act as the private FDR judge based on the level of experience that's needed for your case, who might be best suited to help you reach a resolution, and your budget. It's down to the two of you to choose somebody jointly, and this is usually going to be based upon availability, cost, any particular issues or experience which you'd find it helpful for the private FDR judge to be able to deal with. Well, the reality is that the court process isn't always best suited to resolving these types of disputes. Often the judge that you will see on the day in court proceedings will have many cases in their list, and they won't always be able to read all of the bundles page by page in every case that they're dealing with on that day, which means that while they'll try their best to assist you, they may not have the time to gain more than a sort of cursory understanding of the main issues in the case, and that may not be what you were hoping for, bearing in mind that you might have waited several months for that day to come around, and it's often a very expensive process and an expensive day to prepare for. The judge may also have less experience of dealing with some types of family case than others. For example, You may have a judge who has an experience in private or public children proceedings, whereas your case is a complex financial matter, which they may have not necessarily had as much experience of dealing with in the past. Sometimes certain types of court hearing take priority over others, and this could impact on the time that's actually made available to you on the day of the court hearing. Sometimes even the court will contact each of you a few days before the hearing is actually due to take place, when everybody has sort of started to prepare for the hearing, and often when costs have been incurred, and sadly tell them that there might not be a judge available to them on the day because of the difficulties of the resources that the court is experiencing. So this can mean that legal costs and barristers' fees are wasted because of the lack of available court time. In contrast to this, a private FDR judge will be available to you throughout the whole day. They'll have time before the hearing to properly read and digest all of the documents in your case, and they will not be dealing with any other cases on the day. So they'll be available to give a considered, informed indication of the likely outcome if your case proceeds to a final hearing. Another benefit to a private FDR hearing is that the facilities are likely to be a little bit more comfortable, and that can actually have an impact on how you feel on the day and how easily you're able to speak to your legal team, take advice and negotiate. Often you don't want to be making big life-changing decisions. If you're being forced to negotiate in a corridor or outside a courtroom, it can be a very difficult set of circumstances for you, and that's something which can be avoided with a private FDR hearing. With a private FDR hearing, you'll be guaranteed that there will be separate rooms available for each of you and your legal team. You'll have access to refreshments, Wi-Fi's, printers, and anything else which you might need throughout the day. And when you contrast that with a court FDR, you may find that there are not private rooms available, and negotiations can end up taking place in awkward places and in difficult circumstances. So a private FDR is generally more comfortable, more informal, and you have the benefit of the privacy and a carefully selected judge who's able to take the time to read through the material and be available to you throughout the day when needed, and hopefully help you both to come to an informed decision together, which avoids the case going to a final hearing. Well, private FDRs are a relatively new thing. They haven't always been available, and it's only in recent years that they've started to gain the necessary judicial recognition to ensure that they're treated as a part of the overall court process, and they can't be used to delay or duplicate aspects of the proceedings. If you can't reach an agreement at a private FDR, it might be necessary to ask the court to list a further short hearing in a few weeks' time to make directions and prepare for a final hearing, whereas at a court hearing those matters could have been dealt with on the day. A private FDR and a court FDR is only an indication from a judge. So if you don't reach an agreement, the FDR process doesn't provide you with a binding outcome. And if this is what's important to you, then you might want to consider arbitration as an alternative, and your solicitor will be able to advise you on whether that's appropriate in your circumstances. But the main thing that puts people off having a private FDR as opposed to a court FDR is price. The private FDR judge will have to be paid for, and this is in addition to the cost of your legal representatives, and this might not be affordable for everybody. Often the cost of the private FDR judge, however, is outweighed by the benefits of having everybody there at the private FDR in the best possible circumstances to try and reach an agreement, and that really brings with it an increased likelihood of settlement, which might outweigh the cost of the private FDR judge themselves. So although private FDRs can seem like an expensive process, if you're able to come to a decision, then there should hopefully be money saved overall because a final hearing isn't necessary. So how can I get the benefit out of a private FDR, and what can I expect to happen on the day? Well, preparation is key to helping you being prepared to negotiate, and your solicitor will help with this. They may arrange a conference with your barrister in advance in order to discuss strategies beforehand and formulate proposals for settlement in good time before the private FDR. They will also try and agree all of the documents which the judge is going to see on the day, such as the bundle of documents and the asset schedule, and really narrow down the issues which are going to be in dispute at the private FDR hearing as far as possible. The day itself can run in whatever way you choose. Ultimately, the two of you are the ones who are paying for the judge's time, so you are in control of the format and the timing and the way in which the day is conducted. Usually you won't be required to speak during a private FDR hearing. Each of the barristers will make submissions to the private FDR judge setting out what each of your proposals are, and then after this the judge will provide an indication of what in their opinion the most likely outcome would be if the case proceeds beyond that day to a final hearing. Usually what happens then is you'll each go to your separate rooms with your legal teams, and there may be a chance to discuss what the judge has said, and then often changes can follow on either or both sides and further proposals are put, which will hopefully lead to an agreement being reached. Any agreement would be drawn up in the form of a document known as a heads of terms for you both to sign, and then your solicitors would prepare this after the day in the form of a consent order, which would be filed with the court for approval. Alternatively, if there isn't agreement reached, the negotiations can continue. They don't need to stop just because the day has ended. But in the meanwhile, the court is likely to list the case in a few weeks' time for a short hearing, just to consider what else is needed in order to prepare it for a final hearing, to make any directions, and to identify a date when that final hearing can take place. If the case does go to a final hearing, the private FDR judge, like the court FDR judge, will not have any further involvement in the case beyond the FDR hearing itself. And the person who deals with the final hearing won't see any of the papers that were filed within the private FDR, and they won't be told of any of the negotiations or the proposals that were exchanged at the FDR hearing. The process is done on a without prejudice basis, just to give you the privacy to really be able to talk and explore options and hopefully try to settle matters and reach an agreement. So I hope that this has outlined to you how private FDRs work, and you'll be able to consider whether or not this might be something which would be suitable for you. If you'd like any more information, we have a team of very experienced family lawyers here at Russell-Cooke who'll be able to help you and guide you through the process and explain to you your various options so that you can decide what's best for you in these circumstances. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen.